If there's one thing that I've picked up over my time in this game, it's that a lot of people just don't really fully understand or know a lot of the fundamental rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm not just talking about like riggers, damage step, things like that, missing the timing. I'm talking about like the policy, which, you know, if you don't know, technically when you enter a tournament you agree that you've read all the policy documents. Obviously no one has, except if you're a judge, and if you're especially autistic like me, you'll carry around a full folder of the policy documents wherever you go. Being as autistic about the rules and the game as I am, I'm very, very good at keeping a close memory of a lot of these things. And so I'll often notice people talking about the game, and they'll bring up some rule and just be very incorrect about it. And it's very often people just make assumptions about what these rules are based on what they've heard, and no one goes to double check what that rule was. So I thought I would just go through a few of them today in a bit more of a casual video. I realized that a lot of my delay in getting a lot of projects out I really want to do is that I spend a long time trying to get a script done, and I'm really bad at writing scripts. I'm really bad at like committing the time into writing a script. So if I just do it like this, where I'm just off the cuff, I think I'll get through what I'm trying to do without waiting 4 months to actually finish writing the script for this. That being said, I do have some scripted content in the works, but yeah, as you might guess, that's going to take a while. So what's first? Well, there are a number of things that I'll cover today, only like a handful, and I want to start with something fairly simple, and that's going to be shuffling. Now, this is not something that's really enforced, and it's not really a big deal. And I'm not talking about like pile shuffling. The policy documents do say that pile is an allowed shuffle, and personal takes on that is not something I'm going to express here. If you follow me on Twitter, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with my perspective on pile shuffling. But what I'm actually talking about is the procedure for shuffling before a match. So what's the standard kind of shuffle people do? Well, generally what you'll see at any given event and on feature, and I'll tend to do this as well, is you will shuffle your own deck, you'll pass the deck to your opponent, and then your opponent will shuffle your deck, or just do like a cut. Usually people just do a single cut, and that's fine, and they'll pass it back. The actual written procedure in policy documents is a little bit different. Quote, "Your deck must be randomized using an accepted shuffling method, and then cut. This must be done at the start of every duel, and whether a game mechanic requires you to shuffle your deck. You must thoroughly randomize, shuffle, your deck in view of your opponent. After your deck is thoroughly randomized, it must be presented to the opponent. The opponent must randomize, shuffle the deck further, and then return it to the original owner. The owner may then cut their own deck. If they do, they must present it to the opponent, who must then cut the deck again and present it back to the original owner." It definitely feels weird to do your shuffle, your opponent shuffles and passes it back, and then for you to then do a cut and present it back again. Your opponent's gonna be like, "What are you doing? We already cut it." So I get why people don't do this, but yeah, technically that is what you're meant to do, but it's not really enforced for obvious reasons. But just something I thought was funny to start off this video with. Now, this is the most common thing that you'll see people just blatantly get wrong, and that is note-taking. So often I'll see somebody post, someone will say, "Oh yeah, in Yu-Gi-Oh, you're not allowed to make notes. It's completely banned. You can't write anything down. You have to remember everything." And not only is this wrong, it's gotten way better over time. The note-taking rules have been amended multiple times, and they're really, really good right now, I think. The main thing to note about note-taking is that you are allowed to write things down that keep the game legal and prevent illegal actions from occurring. That is the main prescribed purpose of notes in Yu-Gi-Oh! And this actually encompasses a lot of things. The most basic thing is life points. Both players have to keep track of life points. This is another thing people don't often do. They'll let their opponent do it, or they'll do it digitally. Technically, you have to both be writing them down so that if there's a disagreement later, a judge can refer to a written record and see where the disagreement comes from. You're allowed to write anything down that keeps the game state legal. So you can track things like your mandatory effects. So if you have to resolve SP to come back in the end phase, you can write that down. Because if you don't, the game state becomes illegal. You can write down if stats of things have changed, because you want to make sure that damage dealt is legal. You can write down that the attack points of access code are 53, or the stats of a nib token, because those will impact the game if you get those numbers wrong. People conflate this with something like SCARM. You can't write down that you need to activate SCARM in the end phase, or, well, now it would be a more appropriate example now would be Albion the Branded Dragon, for Fallen and Virtuous. You can't just write down, activate this in the end phase, because it's optional. That's something you can't write down. You can't write down reminders of correct plays, not the purpose of note-taking. And in the same vein, you can't have pre-prepared notes, such as combo guides and things like that. There was a thing a while back at YCS Anaheim, which was an event I attended as a player, which was the Guess Who board. And as funny as that was, it pretty obviously was going to get disallowed eventually. It's just pre-prepared device to track your effects. You can write down which effects you've used. You can write down that you've used the effect of Sheeran this turn, or that you've used each individual Malice name. Those can be written down, because whether or not they get activated again, once again, would determine whether or not it's a legal game state. There is actually one type of pre-prepared notes you are allowed to keep, that you are allowed to keep a copy of your deck list, and the reason for this is so you can keep it legal between games when you're siding. Of course, Neuron now letting you look at your deck list at any time eliminates this as an issue for physical copies. The other thing is, you don't want to be writing down things constantly. You don't want to be delaying the game with them. You have to use written notes for this. You can't use physical objects. So this comes into the vein of things like dice for tracking stats and things. Unfortunately, you are not really allowed to do this. They often will, but you should not be surprised if you get told not to do it by a judge, especially on a feature match. It's not like a big deal, but if you're trying to track something like, she's now banned of course, but if Appaloosa was legal, something like her, you should be writing down those stats, not using a dice to track them. And of course, the most important thing here, and this conflates with the next topic, which is private knowledge. If you look at your opponent's hand through the effect of Noroi, for example, you don't get to write any of that down. You do not need to know that to maintain the legal game state. You're just going to have to remember it. You know, some games let you do that, some games don't, but that's the case here. I think most people pretty much know this one, but it's important just to bring it up, I suppose, just to make sure we cover all our bases. Alright, next one up is one that people often do misunderstand, and that's partly because the rules on these have changed significantly recently, especially the most recent major update to the policy docs. It is a significant change to these rules, so fair enough, but they're important to know. And that is private and public knowledge. There was a significant portion of time where you were not allowed to ask a lot of questions about, like, what has been done in a turn, what's in someone's hand, etc. And it was kind of difficult to actually get a lot of information. You couldn't look up card names and things on Neuron. You had to use the camera feature to scan a card to pull up its text, and that was only meant to be done for translations. But that policy has obviously changed, and I think a lot of people don't realize how much that's changed, or that it's changed at all. And a lot of people didn't know the old rules either. So the thing about public knowledge is, if you're asked a question about public knowledge, you do have to answer it. Obviously, if someone's asking 50 questions, you should probably call a judge about slow play and things like that. But generally, you are meant to answer questions. Information printed on any card is always public knowledge. If a duelist has a question regarding the printed information on a card that is not currently public knowledge, they can use the card search function in Neuron to look up the information if they do not disrupt the pace of the game by doing so. This is the first major change. You used to not be able to do this at all, but now you can. For example, if your opponent reveals that they're playing Dracotel by normal summoning Lucius, you are allowed to go into Neuron while they're comboing and search Dracotel and look up every Dracotel card's card text. You didn't used to be able to do this. You used to only be able to look up cards that were involved in the current game state, which wasn't particularly helpful because you had them right in front of you. The following information is considered to be public knowledge unless a card effect states otherwise. That will not happen very much. It's like exactly question I think this is addressing. The number of cards in your hand is always public. The number of cards in your deck is always public, including your extra and side. The number and names of cards in your graveyard and banishment. Life points. Any notes taken, you're not allowed to take your notes and keep them secret off to the side. You have to show your opponent your notepad if they ask. And which cards were searched, summoned, set, destroyed, banished, activated, or targeted by an effect during the current turn. So there is discussion to be made about like why it's only one specific turn, but that's not why we're here today. I'm just here to address the actual reasoning. What it used to be was that you could not ask questions about anything that had happened even during the turn. You could ask very limited questions. And what it is now is generally, I think this is to avoid disruptions to the pace of play by asking questions about several turns ago actions that are just going to be hard to remember. That's probably it, but speculation. You can now ask if your opponent does like a bunch of searches in a turn, and it's multiple actions ago, you can go, oh, what did you search off this? Most like common thing I think where this comes up is against Dracotel right now. If your opponent sets a bunch of traps and stuff off Dracotel cards, at the end of the turn one you can go, okay, and which cards did you set where? Still in their turn. As long as it's still in their turn, you can't, once you get to your draw phase, you can't do this anymore. But in their end phase, you could go, okay, you set what, Flame, Horn, and you set Flame and Horn, where are they set? Which zones? Because which zones they were set in, they were set specific zones at specific times, and which cards they are, and that is all public until the end of the turn. So they can reveal, and they should reveal a card and show you that's where it is on the board. So you can ask things like that. You didn't used to be able to do that. What I've noticed is that some people can be a little bit tricksy with the meaning of these statements. With, well, the term revealed isn't mentioned here. If I go like Razan and I reveal Shifter in my hand, I don't have to tell you I have Shifter because that's not listed in here as a thing that makes it public knowledge. The sentence is a little vague like that. It doesn't specifically say that. But the spirit of the policy is pretty clear, and you're very unlikely to get away with that logic, that line of reason. You will absolutely be told, no, that is public, you revealed it this turn. So yeah, just be prepared for that. Generally, I think it's a pretty bad idea to try to find a loophole in policy, because either it won't work at all, or it'll very quickly be changed to get rid of your little loophole anyway. We can cover some quick examples. Whether or not you activated Prosperity in a turn, you do have to say that, which is relevant because it puts a lock on you. So if I was trying to go, oh, I need to play around, do I need to play around some draw card, like Engage, I don't know. You can ask if they use Prosperity because that is relevant to that restriction. There's a good example here with Kashtira Unicorn, which of course my camera crashed. Very epic. Donation options are available to me if you wish to help fund a new webcam before this one completely goes kaput. So there's a great example here for banishing face down, for example, with Kashtira Fenrir. A Fenrir banishes a Kid Close face down. Funny. And later in the turn, the player asks which card is banished face down. Now, as you may know, face down banished cards are private knowledge, but because it's still the turn the card was banished, you are required to answer which card it was. But of course, once the turn passes over, that face down banished card is no longer public, and you do not have to tell your opponent what it was. And as an extension to that, as to clarify what I was saying earlier, you can then ask the follow-up question, what is the effect of Kid Close? Generally, what people will do is pick up and show you the set card, but ideally, they want you to use Neuron or just recite the effect. For the most part, you can probably gauge that private knowledge is just the opposite of public knowledge, but it's always worth clarifying, right? Information that is private knowledge may not be revealed by a duelist except by a card effect. Duelists may not answer questions about a game state information that is considered private knowledge. Intentionally giving false information about something as private knowledge or intentionally revealing information that is considered private knowledge may result in a disqualification penalty. It's really, really important that you do not accidentally reveal important information or, intentionally reveal important information like this. Most common example will be, revealing your hand, stuff like that. So yeah, there's a quick list of things that are considered private knowledge. All cards still in the deck, all cards that are face down, even if they've been face up, unless they were set on that turn, of course. The cards in the hand, and which cards were searched, set, summoned, destroyed, banished, activated, or targeted by an effect during a previous turn. You may not reveal your honest in hand unless you are activating the card. And this is where people got a little bit confused, is that there is an example here that says, Duelist A cannot ask Duelist B, do I know any of your cards? Now this reads a little confusing initially, because they say, well, you're allowed to ask about things that were searched this turn, right? So you can ask, well, what do I know that's in your hand? The difference is you are still required to ask about specific things that happened. You can ask, what did you search off of? What did you search off of Jokel? You can't ask, do I know cards in your hand? What cards do I know in your hand? You have to actually ask what they were searched by. For example, in the Dracotel example, you can ask, what set traps did you set off of these Dracotel effects? You can't ask, do I know your back row? Whether or not you like this, that's just how it is. And all the other examples in here, they specifically specify after the turn that things happened you can't ask, to make it super clear that you could otherwise ask these questions. And then as a little addition on the end of this is about hand and deck verification. This is something that you should already know at this point. This changed a long time ago, but this was the old Mind Crush ruling that if Mind Crush is activated and they call the name, your opponent does not have to reveal their hand to you. The game now operates on this sort of trust level where if you have a reasonable evidence that your opponent is lying to you, you call the judge and the judge will resolve that situation accordingly. But otherwise, you are to trust that your opponent is playing legally and is not, deceiving you. And I think this generally avoids a lot of issues. And it avoids us having to have cases where the card just gets to reveal your opponent's entire hand. Given we've had 2 ban cards for that, it's probably for the best that Mind Crush does not work like that anymore. Alright, so this is a quick one for my friends over in Deck Check. And this is just be careful about what you put in your deck box. People just don't seem to realize this. Your deck box needs to only contain your deck. You shouldn't have unofficial cards from other games in there. You shouldn't have unofficial field centers and things like that. You shouldn't have a second deck. So ideally, please don't carry a double deck box. And if you do, take out the second deck when you're sitting in a match. Because the deck check teams, when they go and check your deck, they're going to look at it and go, there's 2 decks here. You could, do any number of things with this. Don't have extra cards in there unless it's for translations. And you should be very clear about that. You can have your tokens and your side deck and obviously and stuff in there. You can have your dice, but just nothing else. Don't put your entry pack pulls in your deck box mid-round. You just don't want to start getting game losses because you put the supers you pulled from entry packs in your deck box, It's really easy to get caught up on and just don't do it, Alright, so this next one is more controversial position one. And it's about the new time rules. So, specifically determining your outcome of your match in time. And every once in a while, someone will post about this and talk about this as an issue. And, you're free to like or dislike the new time rules. You're not forced to like them, you're not forced to dislike them. but you do have to follow them. And I get it. I get why you may not like the new rules. I get why you may not like the double losses. There is positives and negatives to be said of the old system and the new system and the system we had before the old system and the system that other card games use. I don't think any games found a perfect time rule system yet. The important thing is that while you're playing this game, you have to follow this game's rules. If you go to the end of a round, a time is over, I'm sorry, it is a double loss, and do not roll for it. Do not ask your opponent for the win at this point. Do not tell your opponent that you should have won. Do not give your opponent the win. You need to be careful about this stuff, because, like, I get it. I get why people might want to give their opponent the win. I get why people feel like they should argue that they should have won. I get why people think they should roll for it. If you get seen doing any of these things by a judge at like a regional or an ATS or a YCS, you're breaking a very significant rule, and it can lead to a DQ. It can very easily lead to a DQ. I know it sucks. I know it's a bad feeling to get a double loss, but that's the rules. And I'm a big stickler for just following the policy. And I know people don't necessarily always like that, but, you know, if you offer to roll for it, that is already grounds enough for a DQ. You don't even have to have your opponent accept it, because you are trying to break the rules. If your opponent accepts it, you're both breaking the rules. Let's clarify a little bit about this, though. You are allowed to say, I think you should concede. I'm in a winning position, I think you should concede. When there's still time on the clock, you're allowed to say this, but you should not badger your opponent. I think you should only ask them to concede once. If you keep going, you are trying to coerce them, essentially. You're badgering them into conceding a game they clearly don't want to concede. You cannot offer anything in exchange. So you can't be saying things like, to improve our tiebreakers, or I'll give you some of my prizing, or I'll pay you. This is all bribery, this is all coercion, it's all collusion. You will get DQ'd. You're allowed to ask your opponent to scoop. That's it. Any further beyond that is clear grounds for disqualification. This is not to say that you should be always doing this. I want to clarify that you are allowed to do this. Just you be careful, because you're not allowed to harass or badger your opponent, and you're not allowed to manipulate the outcome. And specifically, I will be clear again, is only before time runs out. The moment you're trying to discuss this after time runs out, you are beyond what you're allowed to do. It sucks, I'm sorry, but once that timer hits 0, the match is over and that's a double loss. Most of the time, if this is a bigger event, there's not going to be that many matches that go into time overall compared to the majority. A judge is most likely already watching your game. Alright, so that's all I can think of right now for like the most notable things to me of rules that people don't fully understand or appreciate, I suppose. If you can think of anything else that I maybe should have talked about, please feel free to leave it in the comments. But for now, thanks for watching. This is a little bit of different kind of content. I've done a video like this every once in a while. I think I did a similar thing with Branded, which was another unscripted thing, just off the cuff. So if you like this style of content from me, please let me know, and I'll try and get some more stuff done like this as well. I'm trying to also be a bit more dynamic with the camera and using the space of my setup. I like holding the mic, it actually kind of feels nice. I don't like the arm, and it's like restrictive in the movement and stuff. I don't like sitting down chatting. I feel like this makes it more active, more investing, you know, more engaging. So if you like this, please let me know in the comments, and I'll have some other more interesting scripted content on the way in the coming months. Who can say? Hopefully it'll be out before Nationals in June. But who can say? ADHD be like that. Bye-bye.